Good morning. For all the German speakers, do you know what my last name means in Austrian German? With one N, crane with one N? It's horseradish. Just to make the connection. Yeah, luckily I'm not speaking German since I have I'm not sure about the nasty, but I have an Austrian accent, so probably English is better for everybody. And I want to talk about Docker images and what we do about those. Thanks for the introduction. I'm part of the infrastructure team. I always say I'm infrastructure, and then this is a Unix pipe. I piped it out into developer advocacy or avocados or whatever. This is the official title that we're using now. So, who's using Docker? Quick show of hands. Good, that's the right audience. Who's using Docker in production? That's still a lot. Who is using Docker for stateful images? That's very few. Okay, that's the usual thing we see. It's good to talk about, but most of you are using that for development, right? Like our images, maybe. So, who's using our images? Quick show of hands. Or who is thinking that they're using our images? Because maybe they are not. Who is using other images for Elasticsearch? Anybody is aware of that? You might, unsuspectingly, but we'll get to that. We have this quote internally that Docker is kind of the world's most heavily funded college project, or at least that's the feeling we get sometimes when we run into bugs and various things that we don't like so much about it. But I don't want to rant about Docker too much. I want more to talk about kind of the struggle that we have for providing official Docker images. And I think this is the right Docker logo, by the way. And we are all the little Nemo fish down here. And the big bad Docker will eat us at some point. So I want to talk a bit about what even is official, because official is kind of a fancy word in the Docker ecosystem. Base images, release policy, bit about security, support, and finally orchestration. So what's in the term official? What do you get when you do this? Docker pull Elasticsearch. Is this official? Yes? Are we involved in those images? Anybody knows that? We are not. These are not our images. Because this is very confusing. You go to hub docker underscore Elasticsearch, and then you have official repository. You can see their official repository Elasticsearch. The weird thing is, then down here you have a deprecation notice. Did we give up on Docker, or what happened here? The problem is, this is Docker Inc. official. And Elastic, the people building Elasticsearch and the other open source products, were never involved in these products, because that was built by Docker Inc. But for Docker Inc., this is official because they did those. We have our custom registry. Who is aware of our custom registry? Anybody? Okay, a few, good. This is where we are pushing our images. Jess, who is also very big in the Docker ecosystem, she recently tweeted that she's kind of surprised that not more people are doing this. And we're also surprised. And we also see a lot of people complaining if you're using a custom registry, because everybody seems to be using Docker Hub and seems to like it. And we're never sure why, because we were not that happy with the stability and performance at some points. And we have our own cloud service, which is based on Docker images. And to spin up new clusters for customers, we need to efficiently and pretty much all the time be able to pull images. So that's why we started hosting our own registry. So speed and reliability was one of the drivers. The other one was download statistics. So whenever you download our software, we will keep track of, based on the GeoIP, we will keep track of which version are you downloading, which product, from which region are you coming, and we have a daily email where we see, okay, these are the most downloaded versions, and these are the most active regions. And we'll actively try to engage then in sales operations or marketing operations based on where we see activity. And also marketing likes to brag about big numbers, and they say like, oh, we had 200 million downloads of everything. And of course, since everybody's using Docker nowadays, they want to include the Docker numbers in those. So that's why we try to keep our own registry, because if you're using Docker Hub, they have this little label like X million downloads, but we don't get any detailed statistics about versions, and also not where people are coming from. So we kind of want to keep track of that information as well. We also have a front end for our Docker images now, which is maybe a little cleaner than what you'd get on Docker Hub. We have been thinking about what URL that should have, because to pull our images, you have docker.elastic.co. But we had like in our Nginx configs, we had a hard time making the differentiation what is a browser and what is a Docker pull. So we needed a different URL just to avoid any problems around that. Any guesses what is the right URL for this one? And we had like various variations, but in the end we settled for www. Which is kind of obvious once you found it. So this is where you can see all the images that we are building. But people are sometimes complaining that they have various problems around that. Some have like a workflow based on Docker Hub. Our current registry doesn't work too nicely with IP version 6 because the cloud provider that we're using doesn't provide IP version 6 everywhere in its stack. Maybe they should stick to selling books and not doing cloud stuff, but that's a different discussion. And then we have China as a problem. And that is something that we kind of forgot about, that China has this great firewall and they block a lot of stuff. But Docker Hub has a proxy in China, so that's how you can do your downloads there. And we said, well, we'll do our own proxy in China. Should be easy. Problem is, to have any downloads or anything in China officially, you need to have a company. So by now we have a company, but it was kind of a lengthier process than we were expecting. You need to start a company, and then you have like a lot of legal things around that, and only then can you provide an official proxy or download site in China. As a fallback, we do have the kind of /Elasticsearch, and we are pushing our own images there as well. So if you need IP version 6, or if you are from China, this is your fallback where you can get the images. These will have the same files and images that we are pushing to our registry. It might just be slightly slower because we try to be a bit more performant. And you can get everything that we're building. So we have added an APM product. We have all the beats, Logstash, Kibana, Elasticsearch. We're pushing everything there. So this is pretty much like our Elastic, and then whatever product you want, this is where you can get those from Docker Hub. So a quick quiz. Is it our image or is it not our image? I'm doing this now because it's like 20% or so of the questions that we have on GitHub are from people who are using not our images, but still come to us with their questions. And then we're always like, sorry, we cannot really help you with those. Is this our image, yes or no? Yes? No? No, it's not our image. Is this our image? Yes, this is our image. Is this one our image? No, this is also not our image. Is this one our image? Yes, very good, thank you. And if you know that, you have already kind of mastered like 20 or 30% of the problems that people are running into by using some other images and then complaining. So next up, base images. What is everybody using for base images? Alpine? Anything Debian, Ubuntu, something in that area? Anything Red Hat based? Okay, mix. Who cares strongly about the image? Who doesn't care about the base image? Okay, we have everything. Which is interesting, because, well, we started off with Alpine for Elasticsearch like 2 years ago, because it was what everybody was saying, like, oh, it's small, just use Alpine, it's kind of the future. Everybody wants to build images on Alpine because, well, glibc is kind of dirty and don't use that anymore. MuCL is much better. The problem was we could only put Elasticsearch on Alpine because, if I remember correctly, so Logstash is JRuby, and JRuby, at least back then, but probably still now, is not officially supported on Alpine because it's, well, not that widely used. And I think Kibana, which is running on Node, also Node was initially not supported on Alpine officially. Like, people made it work, but there was a disclaimer like, okay, Node is not officially supported on Alpine. That changed over time, but we were always like, if we want to provide official images, we need something that is officially supported, because we cannot basically cover the Alpine support below. So for those images, we were also always using Ubuntu, which was kind of weird because we had different images. And then, kind of the final straw was why we switched our base images was that we have this machine learning component in Elasticsearch now, which is C++. And that C++ code didn't work on Alpine, of course. And it was like, okay, we need to invest like 2 weeks or more of engineering time. And then it was decided, well, probably not worth it. So we switched to CentOS. So all our images starting in 5.4 are now based on CentOS. Why CentOS? Because most of our paying customers are in the US. And they have this very strong tendency, it must be something Red Hat based. And that was kind of like the most common denominator we could find for that. So that's why all our images are now CentOS. It doesn't have really a strong technical reason why we didn't choose Ubuntu or Debian or something like that. It was just like Red Hat based makes sales slightly easier. We're still not sure if you really should care that much about the base image, but a lot of people do. So that's why we have those. And basically what we do is, so on the top line you can see where this is coming from. For example, in the Elasticsearch repository, we're taking the CentOS 7 image and then we're installing a bunch of stuff. So this is currently the stable version, which is still based on Java 8, for example. So we just install a bunch of stuff into that, and that's what you will get. The upside of having one base image is it's one base image, so it's kind of the same everywhere. You don't need to use the Alpine package manager and sometimes the Debian package manager. It's all the same everywhere. You can share more layers. Since all of them are based on CentOS 7, all our images share those layers and you don't need to download various base images. And because of the JVM, your images will not be tiny anyway. So even if you have Alpine, and Alpine is, I don't know, whatever, 20, 30, whatever megabytes, if you add the JDK, you will still have 150 or whatever megabyte image. So just the base image won't save you. And that's kind of our motivation. The other thing was that we ran into, so this was more than a year ago, it was fixed, but we ran into quite some issues around Alpine, or more specifically MuCL. Which is probably the nicer thing, but it's just not as battle-tested as glibc. And glibc might be old and dirty and nobody wants to touch the code, but it has been tried and tested everywhere. And we just ran into too many issues around MuCL in the end, and we got a bit fed up with those. The main downside is, of course, the size, because the Alpine image is much smaller. So I pulled the numbers. You can see 5.3, Elasticsearch 5.3, this one here is the last image that was based on Alpine, and this is the only Alpine image here. And you can see, well, this is much smaller. Based on 5.4, or I've used 5.6, you can see those images are all now based on CentOS 7, so they are larger. I've also thrown in the latest stable 6 release, which is 6.2, and I have like an internal build for 6.3, which will come out soon, where we had another change. So just for the size comparison, you can see Alpine here was 160 megs or so, and now we're 5 to 700 megabytes. So yeah, the size increased quite a bit. Who is concerned with that change? Anybody? Question is why? It takes time. Yes, exactly. That is kind of the point. Maybe I have that in one of the upcoming slides. The thing is, I totally understand that if you have like something that you deploy 20 times a day, but how often are you deploying Elasticsearch? It's probably not something that changes on a daily basis. I think that is the main issue, or the main difference. If you have a stateless image that changes very frequently, you probably want, or something that changes very frequently, you want to have a small image, because I get it. You need more storage, the transfer over the network takes time. It's just not that nice. But for Elasticsearch, how often are you changing Elasticsearch? We're basically releasing every 2 weeks at most. So I guess yeah, but still the image should be cached. So even if you start it up and down, like the size, okay, it will take up some disk space on your nodes, but probably compared to the amount of data you put into Elasticsearch, the image size will still be tiny. So that's kind of, I'm just asking and trying to get a feeling, because our assumption is you don't care that much about the image size because you're not changing that on a daily basis, but it's weekly or even monthly. And you probably have a lot of data in there anyway. So if the image is 200 megabytes or 500 megabytes, if you have 500 gigs of data in there, who cares?
It's a factor, but it's no killer argument saying, well, we don't use these images. It's just,
okay.
It's not nice. Reasons why you do it.
Okay. We'll see if we get nicer images at some point. Yeah, like I said, does it matter stateful, stateless, or just the speed of how often you deploy? Our argumentation is it doesn't matter that much, or that's our assumption. But if somebody has very strong feelings, we're always interested in kind of getting that feedback, and we might reconsider. I'm not saying we will change that very soon, but we might put more effort into it. The other thing is, Docker images are nice because they're pre-built and everything is included by default. But what to include if you have multiple versions? So in the 5.x versions, we have the open source components. We have XSpec, which is both free components and commercial components. The question is, what do you put in those images? And our initial assumption was that people want to use it probably in production, so we'll bundle in our production or our commercial things as well. So the commercial things are XSpec, and we have added those. So what you get with the 5.x images, you will get a platinum trial. You can disable all of these features, and you just get what you get for free and can basically use it like the open source image. But this is the one image that we provided. And then people were confused and said, oh, I always have to pass in these environment variables to actually disable your commercial features because I don't want to use them. And well, then we changed for 6, because this is kind of a breaking change, we changed that. So in 6.0 to 6.2, we have 3 different images. Basic, this is the open source code and the free stuff that you can use. That is the default image that you get. So if you just pull Elasticsearch, for example, this is what you get. We have a purely open source image, and then we have a platinum trial. So we have 3 different images, and you can pick what fits your use case best. And now for 6.3, we have changed how we structure code internally. So we have this open source basis, and then we have changed the commercial code we have on top of that to be open code as well. So now we have, you can see even our commercial code on GitHub now, just to show you what is there. You still have the part that is free to use. For some stuff, you still need a commercial license, but you can still see all the code. For that, we kind of like only have 2 layers now. So in 6.3 and onwards, we have the default image, which includes a basic license, and only the features that you can use for free are enabled. If you run a command through the API or do it in Kibana, you can start a platinum trial for the commercial features as well. But there is also the open source image. And this is the size comparison. This is the one containing everything. And this is the image just containing the open source parts. So yeah, you will get some extra baggage, but generally, Basic has some nice features that you can use. By the way, anybody aware why we have this weird split between paid and free XSpec and don't put all the free features in open source? That's our anti-AWS feature, basically, because you can get Elasticsearch as a service on AWS as well, which is competing with our own cloud service. Everything that is Apache 2 licensed, AWS will just take and provide as a service. And that middle tier with the free, that is basically our own advantage for our cloud service. So you can use that for free on-premise for yourself. You will get it on our cloud, plus the commercial stuff on our cloud as well. But other cloud providers cannot just take our work, basically, and earn money through it. That's kind of the main idea. That's why we have this kind of weird split. OK, what do we want for the future? JDK versions. JDK versions are kind of a complicated topic by now. Java seems to want to change very frequently. So in the current 6.x branch, we support JDK 8 and 10. So if you get the Docker images for 6. Or up to 6.2, you always got OpenJDK 8. For 6.3, which is currently not yet available, but the internal build candidate uses JDK 10. And the releases will use those as well. For the next major version, we might even need the minimum version of JDK 11, which will be another long term then. But this is already getting a bit tricky because we support 8 and 10. With which one do you build your images? Or do you create more images? But then you have like these 2 flavors, and then you would need 2 JDK versions. And kind of like the numbers of images will explode at some point. Because then people are asking for multiple base images, especially for the beats, like these lightweight agents that we have that we want to roll out everywhere. People are sometimes asking for Alpine images. And we get that that makes more sense because you roll out those to dozens or probably hundreds of servers. And there the size might make a difference. So we might at some point provide the beats on Alpine, maybe. And then people are asking about Windows and want Windows images, which also makes sense because you have this weird paravirtualization layer if you're using Linux on Windows. But if you have an up-to-date Windows version and have a Windows container, you don't need this virtualization anymore. So you might make it slightly more efficient if you have native Windows images. The downside is on our team, nobody is using Windows and nobody wants to. And nobody wants to build and maintain those images. And we always feel like very foreign if we need to do or debug anything around that. So we will see. So far we have avoided providing Windows images, but at some point there might be no more way around it. We'll see. Release policy. We don't have latest. For who is, anybody sees a problem in that? Who wants latest? No? Okay, good. Because we get GitHub issues for that like every 2 months or so and have heated discussions. Okay, you're like, why would you want to do that? Yes, that's also our opinion. Why would you want to do that? But a lot of people are like, of course I want to do that. We call this, or I call these the zombies. Those are the ideas that should have been killed a long time ago, but are kind of shambling along. And that is latest, especially for anything that is stateful. Because the scenario that we really want to avoid is you spin up a 3-node cluster today, and in 6 months you want to add 2 more nodes because you need to have more capacity. Problem is, if you're using latest, maybe the major version has changed, and you might kill your entire cluster with some breaking change, which could happen. So that is why we do not have latest. Like in the very first time when we released the images, like 5.0, I think we had latest, but we killed the latest tag since then. There is no latest, even though a lot of people are very confused. You will always need to provide the exact version number. The other thing that people ask, like, okay, I get that you don't want to have breaking changes, but maybe you could provide a tag for a 5, so you get the latest version within the 5 branch. Or even the minor version, you do 5.6, and I get the right patch level version. Who thinks this is a good idea? Anybody wants to do that? 1, 2, okay. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but it's probably not. One of the things is Lucene is pretty picky when it writes out data. So it writes out something with the current version, and it can only keep that on the same node with the exact version of that. So the shard, which it writes out, it wants to keep that on the same Lucene version. So if we have updated the Lucene version in one of these minor upgrades, you might not be able to move your shards to one of the other nodes, and then your cluster might get imbalanced. And that is something we really want to avoid. Also, if you really want to have, like, there is an important bug fix and you want to get that bug fix, just roll it out everywhere and specify exactly the version that you want to have. Otherwise, we always have the feeling, or at least in our system, we already have too much chaos and unknowns and variation. We don't want to add more variation by having, like, whatever the version is that I rolled out there. We want to have, like, one specific version and minimize that variation. The other thing is what's in a tag. Because here, for example, you can see 5.3.3. And the bottom 2 ones I have downloaded 5 months ago. And the top one 4 months ago. Or the image is that old. Or that is probably the output from a few months ago, so that might be slightly older by now. But you see there is a difference of 1 month. Why is that image, even though it has the same number and we release all the same numbers on the same day, why does this have a newer version, or why is that a newer image than the other ones? Because we had some bug in there and we had to respin the image. The problem is, if you have 5.3.3, you really need to check the image ID to figure out which one do you have, the one with the bug or the one without the bug. Because right now, we don't have any versioning for the Docker images. Right now, we only have versioning for the Elasticsearch version, so that's 5.3.3 for everything, but we don't really have versioning if we fix anything in the Docker containers. So what we'll currently do is, if we find something that needs changing, we will overwrite the tag, and you will manually need to figure that out. If that is a good idea is debatable. The other thing that we suddenly have is, oh yeah, by the way, we've added this, I think, just this week, the label schema. These are the labels that we are, for example, setting for Elasticsearch. It still only contains the Elastic version, so you have no idea of what this is based on. The other thing that we have figured out now is that suddenly we have a lot of dependencies, for example, the JVM. If there is a bug or a security issue in the JVM, do we respin the images that we have done 2 years ago? Are we doing that? Are we not doing that? We don't. So right now, if you're getting an old image, you will get whatever we had when we built that image, and it will be 1 year old. And whatever security issues have been in there, we will not respin your images right now. This is another thing that we're discussing, like, if there is a new JDK version, should we respin every time there is a new JDK version? Should we respin all the old images? Which will be quite a lot, because, you know, different versions and different flavors and everything, lots of releases. Right now, you're just keeping the old version. Yeah, maybe we'll add some image versioning later on, which might include, okay, we found a bug, we've been respinning the image, we've updated the JDK version, we've been respinning the image. So far, we never had that, because then our software was just like our dependencies, and we had a security issue in a direct dependency, we had another patch level release. But suddenly you have like the JDK and also the base image as a direct dependency. Currently, we don't really take care of those. If you want to use one of these old versions and don't want to get the security issues, you will need to spin your own images. I mean, you can take our code and see what we are doing, so it should be pretty easy, but we don't provide that in the registry yet. The other thing is security. Can you run Elasticsearch as root? Any guesses? Who says yes? Who says no? Yeah, you cannot. We will actually system exit the process when we see that. And this is one of the things that we also see kind of frequently. I've even had people on GitHub who said, like, our best practice is to run everything in the Docker container as root. And we want to run that because, well, it's isolated and we don't care. And yeah, I call these the cockroaches. We had the discussion a long time ago when we were running the server process or Elasticsearch on its own. And people accepted if you run a server process, you don't run it as root. Especially since we're using a high port, we don't need the permissions to start on a low port. And now with Docker, that idea kind of has come back that you want to run stuff as root. But we don't do it. The only way to actually do that is you will need to fork the source code and comment out the system exit. Otherwise, there is no way to run Elasticsearch as root. And then we have this other thing. We call it the bootstrap checks. We assume you're in production if you can form a cluster. If you're only binding to the local network, we assume you're in development mode, we will only show you warnings. That clusterable state basically is, okay, you could form a cluster, and we will stop your process if you don't have enough file handles, or if you are using a JDK version where we know there is a bug that might corrupt your data, or there's a list of things that we know that will cause problems later on, and instead of letting you run and fail afterwards, we will, in production mode, fail on startup. So you cannot do that, and you need to fix it first. Problem with Docker, you probably don't want only to bind to localhost because you need to get out of your container. And then suddenly you need to take care of all these production things. For that, we've actually added a new discovery type, which is called single node, which is pretty much the Docker mode. So you can reach out of the cluster, but you still cannot form. So you can get out of the container, but you cannot form a cluster. We will actually block that. So you don't need to fight all these bootstrap checks. But these checks are here to stay, so we're not taking them away. Again, you will need to fork the source code, comment them out, otherwise we will enforce some stuff around that. We also have removed the default credentials. The default credentials were very kind of nice to use for containers because, well, get the container, everything is set up, just use them. By now, you need some bootstrapping, you need to provide an environment variable to have like a temporary password, which you then need to change through the API. That is the new bootstrapping approach, which makes it slightly harder. Also, certificates. What do you do to make people use certificates in an easy fashion? Do you create default certificates and bake them into the image, which is pretty much as good as not having any certificates anyway? Or do you make people set that up explicitly? So for our images, you will need to set up certificates explicitly, which, again, makes setup a bit harder, but unfortunately, security is hard. Support-wise, the one thing that we have is that the Elasticsearch process runs as the user Elasticsearch and uses this UID and group ID. This is what you need. And this is another thing that the official Docker Hub images were not doing. And then every now and then, people complain that their nodes are not coming up. And what people are then saying is, I prefer simple fire and forget Docker containers, which you're like, this is supposed to be a production container. Like, this should do good stuff or the right stuff. This is not fire and forget. We don't treat your data like fire and forget, or we don't try to. So this is not what we want to have in our images. I know that some people have more of this YOLO approach, which probably looks something like this. But this is not what we do with our images. We don't want to have that. So you will need to set that correctly. We don't mutate the bind-mounted directory. We think this is a really bad idea to change anything outside of the Docker container from within the container, and we won't do that. But a lot of people want us to kind of magically fix their shit, and we don't. Yeah, and again, this is probably one of these zombie ideas that people have. And then I really like this quote. Those who do not understand Unix are condemned to reinvent it, but poorly. And this is what we see with Docker a lot, that people say, oh, it's just Docker. And then suddenly you need to know about Linux file permissions again. And people are like, why do I need to know about file permissions? I just want to use Docker. And we're always like, yeah, Docker has things you need to know. Anybody knows these? Docker default values for limit number of files and limit of number of processes. What is being set there? It was changed, it's now infinity. And that is another thing, if you have like anything stateful, which needs some like limits, you probably want to check that. You can pretty easily do that, by the way. So since we're using the CentOS base images, that would be the command to check that, and you can see this is how you can get the limits out of your containers. If you want to use containers for production, make sure you check these before running. Like, if you don't have enough file handles, you will have a very bad day otherwise afterwards. Yeah, and the other thing that we see is people don't know Elasticsearch, people don't know Docker, and they think, well, I have two complex systems, I will combine them, and it will magically work. Unfortunately, it does not. Normally what you get is like chaos and despair. And I think our Docker images, like 50% or more of the support we do is basically Docker support. That's obviously the way to do it. Yeah, and we also see Docker as a pretty leaky abstraction. Like, I know nobody wants to use virtual machines anymore because they're heavy and everything. But Docker still has its problem around the leakiness. For example, we had this issue where something was only happening on Windows because, I don't know, the file system or whatever was a thing. But yeah, that makes reproducing bugs around the Docker images fun because you need to have all the base operating systems to actually try to reproduce some issue. Yeah, fun times. Okay, finally, orchestration. Who is using Kubernetes? Who is using Swarm? 1. 2. Who is using Mesos? For something like that. Nomad or anything else? No? Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much what we see. So right now, we don't provide any orchestration yet. We have the Docker images, which you can use, but we don't do any orchestration. What we are in the process of doing is testing our images for orchestration, because every now and then you run into things you did not expect to happen. For example, Kubernetes up to 1.8 didn't allow dots in environment variables, and we required them. And it was kind of like stupid to tell people, well, you cannot use our images because we require those dots. And dots in environment variables are generally a legal character. It's just like, okay, Kubernetes needs to reinvent the world, and so they have their own things around that. And then you find them, and we try to test things like that to work around them early on. And yeah, Casey Hightower from Google, he's also critical. If you have databases or message queues, maybe you still don't want to run them on Kubernetes. And well, he's a developer advocate for Kubernetes, so we're always a bit careful. You can do that if you think it's a good idea, but maybe it's not. And he also has this other thing where he says, like, basically, stateful services need to meet you halfway, because you need to have like the right building blocks to interact with Kubernetes in the right way. And some systems are further ahead than others. And I think we are, for example, more a bit in the process still. So we'll test, and we will probably provide a Helm chart for Kubernetes at some point in the future, but it's not done yet, so we're more in the process. There are some GitHub repositories of people who are doing that, and they seem to be quite widely used, but it's nothing we do officially right now. And the other thing is we have this product called Cloud Enterprise, which basically is you have either your AWS or Azure or Google or whatever account or your own hardware, you have like we call it runner there, and that will spin up the right Docker containers, and you basically have a fancy UI where you can say, okay, I want to have like this version with this much memory and this space, and I want just to have that running on my instances. And this is one of our commercial products, and you can do upgrades and backups, and it will take care of everything and resize your cluster. Since this is a commercial product, I'm never sure how much we want to invest into Kubernetes, because it would be kind of competing if we have like the free Kubernetes integration and then our commercial offering to orchestrate for you. We'll see. Okay, to wrap up, whenever somebody says like Docker is disrupting the industry, I'm never sure if they mean it in a good or a bad way. Because some of the practices that we see is probably, yes, you're disrupting by taking stuff down if you run them in Docker the wrong way. So that might be one of the ways to put that. A lot of people ask us, like, can I use Elasticsearch, for example, on Docker? And we say yes, of course, but that's not the question you want to ask. The question you want to ask is, should I run Elasticsearch on Docker? And there, you know, we're like consultants, we always say it depends. So if you use Docker successfully in production already, and if you have a lot of experience with your stateless stuff, probably you can do it for the stateful stuff as well. If you don't have that, probably don't start with the stateful services to get started with Docker. Otherwise, we don't take any responsibility for the pain you suffer. It's your learning experience then. Yeah, managing state is hard. And yeah, one thing you might want to do is split out stateful and stateless services into different clusters, because it will make security and upgrades a better experience or an easier experience to work around some of these issues. Yeah. If you want to learn more about Elasticsearch, we're doing a meetup here tomorrow evening, by the way. This is just like side note. And with that, I'm open for questions and complaints, and you need to change this. By the way, before you run off, I have a bunch of stickers here. If anybody wants stickers, grab them. And then I always take a picture so I can prove to my colleagues that I've been working today. Because normally people don't really know where I am. Smile, everybody. Very nice. Any questions? Complaints? Anybody? Everybody wants lunch.
Lunch is ready at 1 p.m., so we have 20 minutes.
Then you have to ask.
So if you have questions, we have plenty of time. All right then. Thank you very much for being here, Philipp. Thank you for this talk.
Find me afterwards if you have any questions you don't want to ask in public. Thanks.